Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Biden administration's unveiled plans to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. The move would end the longest war in U.S. history. Over the past 2 decades, the war has killed more than 100,000 Afghan civilians, 2,300 U.S. service members, and has cost the U.S. trillions of dollars. NATO forces are also expected to withdraw 7,000 troops by September 11th. This is White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
The president has been consistent in his view that there's not a military solution to Afghanistan, that we have been there for far too long.
The White House announcement comes just over a week before the scheduled start of a new round of peace talks in Istanbul between the Taliban and the U.S.-backed Afghan government. But on Tuesday, the Taliban announced it would boycott the talks because President Biden is reneging on a deal made by Trump to have all U.S. troops out by May 1st. We'll have more on Afghanistan after headlines. In Minnesota, protesters took to the streets for a third straight night in Brooklyn Center, where a white police officer killed 20-year-old Daunte Wright, a black man, during a traffic stop Sunday. Police fired projectiles into a demonstration in front of the Brooklyn Center police station, declaring it unlawful, and ordered reporters to leave. Kim Potter, the officer who killed Daunte Wright, and the city's police chief, Tim Gannon, both resigned Tuesday amidst mounting anger. Potter was also an officer trainer. Daunte's aunt, Naisha Wright, responded to the news of her resignation during a joint news conference with the family of George Floyd.
She was the law. She was the law, right? Protect and serve.
Okay.
Put her in jail. Yes. Like they would do any one of us. Yes.
Naisha Wright also revealed George Floyd's girlfriend was her nephew's former teacher. Philonise Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, also spoke at the news conference.
Minneapolis, you all can't sweep this under the rug anymore. We're here, and we will fight for justice for this family, just like we're fighting for our brother. Yeah. To the protesters all around this nation, stand up. Stand up. Come on. We need you all to come out.
The emotional press conference was held outside the Hennepin County Courthouse, where the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin continued inside for a 12th day. Chauvin's defense called its first witnesses, including Barry Broad, a former police officer and so-called use of force expert, who argued Chauvin was acting, quote, with objective reasonableness when he kneeled on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, leading to his death. New body cam footage was also shown to the jury of Floyd sitting handcuffed and giving his name and birth date to Minneapolis police officer Peter Chang, among the first officers to arrive at the scene before Chauvin. Talks are set to resume in Vienna today between the U.S., Iran, and other parties to the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, just days after an attack on the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. Iran is blaming the attack on Israel, which is staunchly opposed to relaunching the international accord. Iran said Tuesday it will ramp up its uranium enrichment efforts following the attack. The Biden administration is moving ahead with more than $23 billion in weapons sales to the United Arab Emirates after reviewing a deal made under President Trump. The deal includes the sale of Lockheed Martin F-35 jets and armed drones. Anti-war groups and progressive lawmakers have called for the U.S. to stop all arms sales to the UAE over its involvement in the Saudi-led U.S.-backed war in Yemen. Ukraine says 40,000 Russian troops have amassed on its eastern border, prompting some to warn Russia could be preparing for war. Another 40,000 troops are in annexed Crimea. But others say Russia is sending its soldiers to the region as a show of force and intimidation to Ukraine and its allies. The U.S. and NATO have vowed to support Ukraine, though it's not a member of the alliance. Analysts also say Russia could be seeking a distraction from domestic issues, including the imprisonment of Alexei Navalny. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Tuesday the U.S. military will increase its presence in Germany, a reversal from the Trump administration's plans to withdraw troops. Austin said the move reaffirms U.S. support to NATO and, quote, improves our ability to surge forces at a moment's notice to defend our allies, he said. President Biden sent an unofficial delegation of former government officials and former lawmakers to Taiwan 2 days after Taipei said China sent 25 warplanes into its air defense zone. China has been increasing military drills around Taiwan and warned the U.S. against intervening in the territory over which it claims sovereignty. In Burkina Faso, authorities have charged exiled former President Blaise Compaoré with the murder of Thomas Sankara, who was killed in a 1987 coup. Sankara was a revered leader and anti-colonialist Marxist who enacted popular social programs and was dubbed the African Che Guevara. Compaoré succeeded Sankara, his one-time close friend, and was eventually ousted decades later in a popular uprising in 2014. He will be tried in absentia. The Guardian reports Facebook knew right-wing Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández was using thousands of fake Facebook accounts to make his political campaign appear more popular and let him get away with it for nearly 1 year after the company was alerted to the activity. Facebook reportedly learned what was happening in 2018, with posts on Hernandez's page receiving engagement from tens of thousands of fake accounts. But Facebook took no action until the following year, even though it violated Facebook policy. Hernandez, a key U.S. ally, has long been accused of spreading misinformation online to discredit his critics and undermine social movements. In coronavirus news, the European rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been delayed after regulators here in the United States moved to temporarily halt its use as reports of extremely rare blood clots were being investigated. South Africa also suspended its use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. 6 women, aged 18 to 48, reported the clots after receiving the shot, and 1 has died. The number represents less than 1 in a million administered J&J shots in the United States, and it's not yet known if the condition is linked to the vaccine. What is known is the standard treatment of blood clots, heparin, is contraindicated for this reaction. President Biden sought to reassure the public the pause in J&J's use would not hamper the White House's vaccination goals.
So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American.
India is fast-tracking the approval of foreign-made vaccines as it reported yet another record daily caseload of 184,000 infections Wednesday. Mumbai and the state of Maharashtra is going into a full 2-week lockdown.
This disease is spreading at a horrifying pace. I say horrifying because today's numbers of positive cases in the state is the highest so far. Nearly 60,212 COVID-19 positive cases have been reported in the state today. Hence, the situation is very grim.
In other coronavirus news, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling on governments to impose a wealth tax on rich people who've profited from the pandemic. A recent report found the world's wealthiest have seen their fortunes surge by $5 trillion since the start of the pandemic. Back in the United States, a new report by the Capitol Police's watchdog reveals officials knew Congress was the target of the deadly January 6th insurrection, yet officers were instructed to refrain from deploying a more aggressive response. Officials on duty January 6th said the use of crowd control equipment such as stun grenades could have helped, quote, push back the rioters. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. An ally of embattled Florida Congressmember Matt Gaetz is reportedly cooperating with the Justice Department in its probe into Gaetz' possible sex trafficking crimes. Joel Greenberg, a former Florida county tax collector who's himself been indicted for sex trafficking, told investigators he and Gaetz gave cash or gifts to women in exchange for sex, this according to a New York Times report. The House Ethics Committee recently launched its own investigation into Congressman Gaetz, a well-known Trump ally. President Biden is nominating Robert Santos to head the U.S. Census Bureau. Santos is president of the American Statistical Association. Santos, who is a Mexican-American, would become the agency's first permanent director of color. If confirmed, Santos would fill the term of Trump appointee Steve Dillingham, who quit in January following whistleblower complaints over the agency's attempt to rush an inaccurate report on undocumented residents. In reproductive rights news, the Food and Drug Administration will allow providers to mail abortion pills to people who choose to terminate an early-stage pregnancy without surgery for the duration of the pandemic. The move was welcomed by medical groups that had been fighting a January ruling by the Supreme Court, which sided with the Trump administration in enforcing the in-person requirement, even after a federal judge waived it in order to spare patients unnecessary travel during the pandemic. Wisconsin is on track for a devastating wildfire season, as hundreds of blazes have already caused destruction comparable to the whole of 2020 in just 4 months. Tony Evers, the Wisconsin governor, declared a state of emergency last week. Climate groups say wildfires are likely to get worse in Wisconsin due to increasing droughts and heat waves. And New York announced it'll become the first U.S. state to divest its pension fund from tar sands companies. Divest New York coalition said, quote, "It's wrong to be invested in companies that are destroying the planet, and it's also financially unwise, considering that the world is transitioning to renewables, which is causing fossil fuel values to steadily decline." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report.